Hello, I'm Kurt Lidke, Executive Director of Klamath Film, and you just watched See Me, a refreshing and light look at life during COVID. With us is the film's producer, Kisha Jarrett. Kisha, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I want to say how refreshing this film was in several respects because it's fantastic to see an Oregon-made film with a black cast, first of all, because let's face it, hashtag Oregon so white.
Mm,
Secondly, it's great to see a film with a black cast that doesn't fall into a lot of the same cliches and tropes that we see far too often on film when a production is predominantly a black cast. Like people can't just be people, but have to fit into a certain groupthink of what Hollywood perceives it means to be black, right? So this doesn't come across as as we would consider it, a black film. It's a film about people surviving through COVID in their own way who happen to be black. Was that a strong conscious effort throughout the production of trying to avoid what Hollywood perceives it means to be black?
Absolutely. Like you just said exactly what we were talking about the entire time, which is it was really important to us to deliver a slice of life film because one of the things that we were just talking about was saying like, why aren't there that for Black people? Why does everything have to be this big sort of like we're not all slave story, we're not also all Friday either. So like we contain multitudes, and for us it's about, especially during the time of post George Floyd, and the Black people that sort of started this process and started the DNA Oxygen program at Artist Rep. We were really tired about being asked about our opinion as a monolith and just saying like that we kind of speak for everybody, and this was born out of a need and a want for people just to see us as individuals and see what we can bring to the table as individuals. And so not only did it feature a solely Black cast, but we also had an all BIPOC production team. So everybody on our creative team was a person of color.
That's fantastic. So explain the whole DNA oxygen background of how this film got funded and came together.
Yeah, so DNA Oxygen is now a program at Artist Repertory Theater. It what began as Artist Rep has these moments of intense content creation called Mercury Companies, and it really just means that we were given the first one 4 weeks, and we did that with leftover payroll protection plan funding. And so we hired 52 artists to work on 11 different projects. And then, May 25th happened, and that was a week before we were supposed to start. The project for the first Mercury company was from June 1st to June 30th. And I asked if there was anybody in the Mercury company that was talking about Black Lives Matter or about social justice or what's happening in our country at the moment, and particularly with Portland, that seemed to be the hot spot right there, right? And
Right.
2 days after the murder of George Floyd was the video that Christian Cooper took of Amy Cooper in Central Park saying that I was going to call the cops, say that a Black man was harassing her. And so it built up a lot of feelings for me. And the answer to the question of are we doing anything was no. Nobody was writing anything about that. Nobody was talking about that. And I said, I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't have something that was about that. And so we took the sort of nine Black people that were a part of that first Mercury company, and we just created a space for us to be with each other and decompress and talk. And all of this was over Zoom at the time too. So like there's also the pandemic that's happening in the midst of all of this. And so that's what really started the conversation about like we wish that we could just be seen as individuals. The big thing that happened outside of that meeting was that it went from a project into we want this to be something that's long lasting. And that became the program that Artist Rep started. And so there's three main goals of Oxygen. The first is to actually create a space for people of color to be able to commune with each other and not have to code switch, and have an affinity space that creates that. The second is to actually be able to build the creative teams with people of color. So often we hear that, oh, well, we just couldn't find a person of color for that role. And so if we are able to start creating a pathway and a pipeline for people to gain entry into that, learn from other professionals, and then be able to move forward, we have the potential of really changing the theatrical landscape of Portland. And then the third goal is to really develop people like artists of color. And that goes through like all of any kind of content development, art development, idea generation, brainstorming, and be able to pay people for that. And so luckily that we had a great meeting with a individual donor who decided that that was a great idea and doubled down and gave us a pretty large 6-figure gift to continue on with that work. And since then, we've gotten several other grants to go into that as well.
That's fantastic. So, how did the story for this film come about in wanting to tell each individual character's story? Because we sometimes see films like this that it's multiple stories that all seem kind of disjointed, but they all have this one little thing that kind of connects them. Films like $20 and Valentine's Day. I'm sure there's plenty of others. 200 Cigarettes comes to mind, where all these stories seem totally separate from each other, and yet there's this one little thing that kind of brings them all together. So, how did the story develop?
Yeah, so that's actually part of what I love about this story is that, so I have a background in both theater and in film. So I'm a writer for both. And so I wanted to create this and this short film in the same way that we devise theater. So we actually came in, I reached out to Dawn Jones Redstone, who's the director of the film. And I said, look, I have an idea for a film. I think that you're the right person to direct it. And she was like, great, can I read it? And I was like, that's the thing. We're going to actually write that in our first week. In Mercury 2, and then 5 weeks later, we're going to film it. And she said, okay, and went in. And so that's what we did. The first week, we had a group of 6 of us. So it was Dawn, myself, Vin Chambry, Josie Seed, who were the other 2 full-time writers, Aki Ruiz, who is a illustrator, and then Ashley Mellinger, who is our line producer, sat in and for a week, and we carved out the story of what we want to say and how do we want to say it. And each person sort of took a character, and then we kept calling it down, and then finally, by the end of the week, we had a piece that looks pretty similar. Of course, some things change, right? Like when you're shooting, but what we wrote is pretty similar to what that is. And then to be able to have this really beautiful moment that appears in the animated portion of it, it was great to have Aki's voice be represented in the actual writing room as well as what you end up seeing in the final film.
I'm glad you brought up the animated segment because I definitely wanted to touch on that. The characters in this film each have such unique personas, and I especially like the animated section. Who came up with the idea for an animated segment which fits the personality of that character so well, and who ended up doing the animation work?
Yeah, so that was another call that I made prior to us actually starting, which is I said, I want to just do something in animation. And it feels like that, I don't know what it is at the time, like, because we hadn't written the script. I just was like, I feel like this is about a minute long animation and, maybe a brighter future. Like, because the pitch was really, it's featuring 3 Black people living in Portland during COVID. And so I contacted Aki Ruiz, who's a graphic designer and illustrator, and I pitched them for the same thing, and they said yes as well, and then kind of came to the table with fresh eyes and an open heart. And through us discovering who those three characters were, it it zoomed into, of course, CL is actually the person that would need to have that animation. And if you know, with seeing the film the way that it is now, originally that animation ended the whole film. And so we actually did a lot of just kind of like figuring and saying like, it's still, when we did that, it was like, it still doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like that's our ending. And so as soon as we made it so that CL was still able to have some journey after that moment, and you get this sort of like pressure valve release from that character, to then end with who we have as Akira, who is Andrea Vernay's character. And we end with that really exceptionally powerful look of her just staring and really seeing the audience as much as she's asking for them to see her. So yeah, we saw that and we were like, that's it. That's where we are.
I had a feeling this year that with the film festival, we would get quite a few films about COVID and the whole coping with the times motif. But I appreciated the tone of your film that stood out from a lot of the others that we got, because it really is just a day in the life of. It's as simple as that. It doesn't need to be more complicated. It doesn't need some grander story arc. As we all struggle with figuring out how to navigate this new normal,
Yeah.
why can't it just be a day in the life? Were you trying to do a COVID film without making it a film about COVID?
Yes. I think like it too, right? Like at the time we were in Portland, we were one day away from having to end early because of us going back into shelter in place in restriction land. So it was still something that, like, we cared about and paid attention to all the time. And we had highest safety protocols. Like, we were filming in zones and there were only a certain number of people that were allowed in certain places. And we had tag teams of, like, because of some of those shots, like, we couldn't have more than 3 people in there at a time. So we had to, like, trade off on, sometimes our grip would have to go in and then somebody else had to come back out and come back in with our scene. So it was really a team effort. And one of those people, Kayla Kelly, I give her huge props. Kayla was our on-set safety monitor, and she really did. She walked through every hour and made sure that everybody was, like, sanitizing, and we had, like, UV light bags to cleanse everything and sanitize, and everybody had individual things to be able to eat, and the masks, and nobody got sick. So we're pretty appreciative of that. But yeah, I think anything that's made during this time is sort of by default a COVID film. You just have, like, no matter what it is, like, even if it had nothing to do with it on screen, when you talk about the film, you have to talk about, like, how you made it, and how you made it was under all of these other rules where you would normally in a film environment be very close to each other. You're, like, kind of on top of each other, or doing whatever, or sharing things like that, and you couldn't do that with this.
Yeah, it seems very ironic because we know how difficult it is to actually make a film, much less shoot a film about a global pandemic during a global pandemic.
The pandemic, right?
Yeah, with all those extra added restrictions, it just complicates an already incredibly complex process. But what going back to the characters in this film, what I like is that they're very relatable. as we all have spent the past year suddenly just trying to figure out how to occupy our time on a day-to-day basis. I know there was a long trend of everyone try to make sourdough bread, or everyone learn how to knit, or whatever else could possibly be done from home. How much of these character personalities and experiences come from personal experiences by you and some of the other writers that were involved?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody had a little bit of themselves placed into those characters. There's little bits that we see in everybody. I think that for myself, I still get giggly at the moment. That like one of my favorite things that I added to the script was just that Jones, when he's sort of like rocking back and forth and time is moving really slowly, that he just sort of like falls asleep and then looks down and then like kind of wakes himself, like shakes himself back up, and then you see like the hole in his sock. And I think like that kind of stuff is very, very touchstony and very real. Like I think right after the film was released, I went to the doctor or something, and I looked down and like I had a hole in my sock, and I was like, I am a real life Jones. Like it's just this thing of like we don't, we're not really like living like we normally would live. We're not dressing the same way. We're not talking the same way. We're not eating the same thing. So I think that even that social interaction, and for people that do have that anxiety about joining the outside world in quote unquote normal time, that we talked a lot about how some of those people and did some research and talked to some people about like, this time was really great for them because all of these advancements in terms of being able to chat on Zoom and being able to have that where they don't have to go outside. So that then what's the kicker? What is the pusher? What is the thing that can make you overcome those types of things? And then, really with the last character that Drea plays, that was just about if I did not have to have, or Josie did not have to have yet another Zoom meeting, back to back to back to back to back. And then on top of that, to hear a bunch of people just sort of talking about how like exhausted and overwhelmed they are, while also asking you to be like the representative of like all Black women everywhere. It's just it's exhausting. It's exhausting. So I think having it feels like Josie for the most part, that was her character of just like you have all of this sort of like anger in that Shakespearean monologue that's going on, and yet she's just living her day until finally you meet the two, and she's having that audition.
Yeah, I can definitely relate because this is my fourth Zoom call of the day, and I still have more after this.
Exhausted.
Well, welcome to the new normal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Don't go to the bathroom. It's just
yeah.
Zoom.
So with the limited crews, I know that made things you didn't quite get the same kind of camaraderie that you normally get on a film set or on a community theater production, because you're trying to keep everyone separated out. But were there any like really memorable bloopers or really funny moments on set that still make you laugh to this day?
I mean, let's see, on set.
Or just in the course of the production itself?
Yeah, like each day, because built each character in one day. It was really something that each person brought something that was really magical to it. I think that Bill Ray, who played Jones in it, one of the things that I giggle about so much is that in that opening scene, and Jones is sort of like, you see see the trees and sort of get this feeling of like, oh yeah, that's Oregon. That's what I'm looking for. And then he's getting out of bed. I will never forget that Dawn, when they met and they had their own individual conversation, that Dawn called me later and she said, so Bill offered to be naked if we needed him to be in that opening scene. And I was like, oh, did he? Okay, thank you for that. So like, we just had people that were like overly excited to be involved and like add their own contributions to the characters, whether we needed that or not. But no, I mean, like, everybody was super great. And I think that, we still have some people that this was their first film that they worked on in a professional setting, and they've gone on to work on a couple of other ones. Dawn Jones Redstone just wrapped her first feature film that she just shot. So, there's a lot of sort of reoccurring team faces that are in that as well. So it's pretty exciting to see people that we met in this sort of setting.
Right. Well, thank you, Kisha, so much for this film and for joining us today. See Me will be screened on Sunday, September 19th at 3:30 p.m. at the Ross Raglan Theater in our Northern Shorts category, and available all week on demand. Thank you so much, Kisha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.